Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to continue a series on endgame unique items in depth, and with episode 6 of this, we're going to be looking at one of the most complex items in the game, Precursor's Emblem. This is an extreme RNG item that comes out of the Delve mines, and it tends to be best friends forever with Kalandra's Touch. Kalandra's Touch being one of the rarest drop anywhere unique items in the game. This is me bringing back an old series from 2021. Many of the videos from then have become dated, and so I'm restarting it and looking at some new unique items as well as redoing some of the ones from back then. Let's start with a quick overview of this item. Everything about this item varies from one copy to another. There are, I believe, 68,921 variants of this item, which is 41 to the power of 3. Not all of the stats you can get on this item are equal, and not all 68,921 variants are even remotely equal. A lot of these are going to be terrible, but some of them can be amongst the best strings in the game. This is a very, very old item, originally added back in 3.4 Delve League, so about 20 leagues ago, and as a result, a number of the mods that it provides have not aged well. However, +1 to maximum charges have actually become better than they were back in that era, and that's largely due to some of the things that scale really well off it that have been added more recently, most notably Badge of the Brotherhood, but there are other things as well. As for the rest of the mods though, some of them were always bad even back in Delve. Others were pretty good then, but they've just fallen behind over time as more and better items have been released in the ring slot. This unique item is somewhat unique in that it comes from a vendor recipe. Just like the taming, which we covered in episode 5 of this series, it comes from vendoring 3 other rings. But unlike the taming, there are 27 different possible recipes, each of which will give different stats, and then there are layers and layers of RNG on top of that. Just like Watcher's Eye, it always has a couple of really basic stats, but then on top of that, it gets one particular special mod that's added from each of the 3 input uniques. Which one you get will vary with RNG, just like your aura mods on Watcher's Eye vary with RNG as well. But unlike Watcher's Eye, you have quite a bit of agency over what mod pools each of these mods is picked from. And that's where all of the complexity is, because that agency comes from a system that's not used anywhere else in the game. We're going to break that down in depth later on in this video. There are 9 different input rings that you can vendor in order to make yourself a Precursor's Emblem. 3 of them drop from Ahuatotli the Blind in Delve, 3 of them drop from Kurgal in Delve, and 3 of them drop from All the Crystal King, also in Delve. In many ways, I think this was Grinding Gear Games taking what they'd learnt from the popularity of the Watcher's Eye and deciding to go, alright, we're going to try and take some of the things that make Watcher's Eye so popular and put them onto a new item in order to make something else that might eventually be equally popular. Precursor's Emblem is definitely not as popular as Watcher's Eye, but it is still a very, very good item. Now with the rings that go into this vendor recipe, each of them will have the word Meadow, Mountain, or Valley inside its name. You will need to vendor 1 Meadow, 1 Mountain, and 1 Valley in order to get yourself a Precursor's Emblem. To make things more complex, there's 1 Meadow that drops from All, 1 Meadow that drops from Kurgal, and 1 Meadow that drops from Ahuatotli, and they'll be different base rings, and they'll contribute different stats to the final product. The thing you need to remember here is that the rings that drop from All the Crystal King have the least restrictions on the mods that they can contribute to the final product. The ones that drop from Ahuatotli the Blind have the most restrictions, and the ones that drop from Kurgal are in between. And I'll put a table of all of the different mods that can roll and which bosses they're tied to down in the description below. Finally, the resistances that you get on the Precursor's Emblem and just the base item that it ends up being are determined by all of the resistances present on the input rings. So if you vendor 2 Sapphire and 1 Topaz ring in your recipe, you'll end up with something that is a 2-stone ring providing cold and lightning resistances. Now, there are 57 different mods that you can get on your Precursor's Emblem. 19 of these are intelligence aligned, 19 are dexterity aligned, 19 are strength aligned, and once more, we'll bring them all up on the screen later in this video. For each set of 19, I mentioned that Ahuatotli drops the most restricted rings. Any ring that comes from Ahuatotli can contribute only 8 of these 19 mods. Anything that comes from Kurgal can contribute 14, and anything that comes from All the Crystal King can contribute all 19 from that particular attribute alignment. Now again, each boss will drop 1 intelligence ring, 1 dexterity ring, and 1 strength ring, and 1 will be a meadow, 1 will be a mountain, and 1 will be a valley. But for most people, you are not going to want to vendor a full set of the All the Crystal King rings. Although you can get the best possible mods from all, you won't have synergies between them. For example, you might end up getting +1 to maximum frenzy charges, and then you might get 1% chance to suppress spells per endurance charge on your character at the time. And you can see there's just not much synergy between these 2 particular mods. What most people tend to do is vendor a triple intelligence or a triple strength or a triple dexterity ring, and accept that they're only going to get one of these All the Crystal King mods, because some of the mods from the other pools are actually pretty good. Now, the very, 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 very best possible rings that you can get typically end up as something like this. They'll have alls +1 to a maximum number of charges mod. So for instance, if it's power charges, +1 to the maximum number of power charges on your character. Then there'll be an Ahuatotli mod that synergizes well with that. And then on top of that, there'll be the mod that comes from Kurgal's ring will actually be a direct copy of the Ahuatotli mod. That tends to be the very best rings you can get this way. And for every combination like this, it's only a 1 in 2,128 chance to get this exact ring. However, while this is extremely rare, this is the equivalent of getting a triple hatred Watcher's Eye from Uber Elder. Instead, what you tend to get and what you tend to settle with is something where you've got one extraordinary mod, which is one of the +1 maximum charges mods, and then one other thing that synergizes well with that. That tends to be a semi-jackpot, and it's a lot more common. That is the Precursor's Emblem equivalent of getting a 2-mod Watcher's Eye that's really good. The most popular configuration to vendor here is an intelligence ring from All, an intelligence ring from Kurgal, and an intelligence ring from Ahuatotli. Again, your jackpot here, +1 maximum power charge, and then 2 good mods that synergize with each other. There are a few different ways that you can get 2 good mods that synergize, and each one is 1 in 2,128. And your non-jackpot, but still very good hit, is to get +1 maximum power charge, and then 2 other reasonably decent mods. This seems to be about 1 in 19, at least based on the assumption that hasn't been proven false, but also hasn't been proven true, that all of the mods are equally rare. Your failure condition is pretty much getting anything else, because a lot of the other mods that are available haven't aged very well. Now, you can do the same thing with dexterity rings, chasing +1 maximum frenzy charges. If you do hit on this, it's still going to be very good. It'll be a bit cheaper. The same thing isn't really the case with the strength rings though, and that's because +1 maximum endurance charges just hasn't held as much appeal over the long term in PathOfExile as +1 to the other charges tends to do. There's 2 main reasons for this. The first one is that the inherent benefits of getting endurance charges stacked up on your character are smaller than the inherent benefits of getting frenzy charges or of getting power charges. And that's because it's easier to get those stats, which are mostly resistances and physical damage reduction, from other sources than it is to get that sort of amount of raw critical strike chance, or with the frenzy charges, that amount of more damage. So for that reason, endurance charges are already behind. And then the second thing is the existence of Badge of the Brotherhood, which is incredibly, incredibly good on builds that are scaling power charges because it gives them a second use case. It means that anything that gives you +1 maximum power charges also gives you +1 maximum frenzy charges. And whilst there are things that can do something somewhat similar for other charges, it's still not on the same level as Badge of the Brotherhood provides. For this reason, All the Crystal King's Strength Ring is not a particularly valuable drop, whereas the other 2 rings can potentially hold value. In this league, 3.24, they've been a bit cheaper than usual, and that's because so many people are chasing the Val aspect that comes from Ahuatotli the Blind. Now, it's important to note that there is no symmetry across these 3 mod pools. The strength pool, the intelligence pool, the dexterity pool, they are not identical to each other. They are similar, but they're not identical. They all have their own little nuances once we get to the individual mods themselves. For example, there is one mod that says 6% increased armor per endurance charge, and then there is a related mod, 8% increased evasion rating per frenzy charge. These are not the same as each other, even though they do very similar things. The energy shield version is 3% increased global energy shield per power charge. You may have noticed that I edited in a ring at one point in this video that had +1 maximum power charge and 6% increased energy shield per power charge. The thing with that is that it actually has 2 copies of that 3% mod, and that's the reason that it's not scaled up further by the catalysts that are present on it. And some of these are really weird, like physical damage reduction is available on the non-strength rings. It's not available as a mod on strength rings, and it's not available tied to endurance charges. So let's quickly go through the strength mods. The ones that can only drop from all the Crystal King rings are +1 maximum endurance charge, which is extraordinarily good. Can be stunned when you're at maximum endurance charges. You have Val Pact when you're at maximum endurance charges. Gain 1 endurance charge a second if you've been hit recently. This one's pretty good, but it's not extraordinary, and it's something you can get easier on cluster jewels if you want it. And intimidate enemies for 4 seconds on attack hit when at maximum endurance charges. All of these do something at least reasonable, but its opportunity cost is pretty high, and that's why these mods don't see all that much use in general. Then there's the mods that can come from Kurgal. So these mods can be contributed by a ring that comes from Kurgal or one that comes from All. And here, regenerate 0.3% of life per endurance charge per second is probably the best, but it's not like this is an extraordinary pool of mods. And then there's the ones that can be contributed by any of the 3 different rings that are strength based. And so these are ones you can even get from an Ahuatotli ring, the most restricted. Of these, the 2 that are probably the best are 5% increased global damage per endurance charge on your character, and 7 to 9 to 13 to 14 flat fire damage per endurance charge. This counts for both attacks and spells. Neither of these mods are extraordinary, but they're probably the best you're going to get, and strength-based precursors are not that good. Dexterity mods are much better. +1 maximum frenzy charge is just better than the endurance charge equivalent. And then you've got 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit, which is a very, very good generator of frenzy charges. This is something that was very popular back in Delve League, but that's fallen off because there's more sources of this mod now, and +1 maximum frenzy charge is the thing that's more important. There's a couple of really niche things then. You have iron reflexes when at maximum frenzy charges, gain a flask charge on crit when at maximum frenzy charges. This one has a cooldown, so it's not as good as it sounds. And gain onslaught for 4 seconds on hit when at maximum frenzy charges. All of these mods are pretty good, but really it is +1 maximum frenzy charge that people are willing to give up their ring slot for, whereas the other mods are just something that you might use for a little while, but that you're going to try to replace over time. The ones that can also come from Kurgal, as well as all, there's 6 here and they aren't all that great. There's nothing here that I would consider to be extraordinary, although it's a little bit of a bonus to get it if the ring is good enough to use it anyway. You'll notice that I point out the regenerate 0.3% of life per frenzy charge per second as not that good, but I thought that that was quite a bit better with the endurance charge one. The reason there is that characters that are built around endurance charges, although pretty rare these days, they have more benefit from that stat because they're more likely to scale it with other sources of regeneration and things that might multiply that life recovery. Whereas someone that's playing a dexterity based build, they're probably recovering most of their life through leech, and as a result, this is going to provide them less benefit. But then when we have a look at the mods that can be contributed from a ring that comes from Ahuatotli, as well as from Kurgal, as well as from all, we see a very interesting one here. 10% global accuracy per frenzy charge. This is actually 12% because you're always going to catalyze this mod if you care about it. This is not something most characters want. But on a small subset of characters, those that scale accuracy to the moon and then scale damage off that, this is extraordinarily good. In fact, it is so good that there are characters that build entirely around it and that actually want 3 copies of this mod, which is also 1 in 2128 if you vendor a triple dexterity Precursor's Emblem, or they may want +1 maximum frenzy charges and 2 copies of this mod, which again, 1 in 2128. This is not something that's central to the meta at the moment, but it has been in the past, and it may well be again. So it's worth knowing that this mod exists. It's much better than it sounds. We also have mods that are the same as those available on endurance charges, 5% global damage per frenzy charge, and 6 to 8 to 12 to 13 flat cold damage per frenzy charge to attacks and spells. These are better because frenzy charges are better than endurance charges, and as a result, there's a little bit more going for you there. On the intelligence mods, the ones that come from all, there is one that's really good, +1 maximum power charge. We then have +1 to maximum curse limit when you're at full power charges, which is reasonably strong, but is probably eclipsed by the unique ring Anathema these days. Then you have mind over matter when you're at maximum power charges. This is something most people don't want because it's very unreliable damage mitigation. 20% chance to gain a power charge on crit is something that's probably easier to get somewhere else. And gain Arcane Surge for 4 seconds on spell hit when at maximum power charges is not bad, but probably not worth giving up your entire ring slot for. In the mods that can be contributed from Kurgal, there is one that I think stands out a little bit here, and that's 3% crit multi per power charge. This can be very good if you're playing a build that is scaling power charges, and of course it is extraordinarily good if you get it on the same ring that also has +1 maximum power charges. Of course, that's not going to be something that will come easily. And then finally, we don't have much in the mods that are contributed by Ahuatotli. Again, we've got 5% global damage per power charge, and we have 1 to 2 to 18 to 20 flat lightning damage per power charge to both attacks and spells. Whilst these are good, overall, I don't think that they're anything to write home about. They're mods that make an existing good ring better, but they're not something that turns an existing mediocre precursors into something that you're happy to use. Now, something some of you might have been thinking about, is it possible to get +1 to each maximum charge on a Precursor's Emblem? Theoretically, I believe the answer is yes, but it doesn't appear to be available for trade in Standard at the moment. You'd need to vendor 1 of each of the all rings, which is pretty wasteful because those are the limiting factor for making better rings. And additionally, it's going to be 1 in 6,859, or approximately 0.015%. If you play in temporary leagues, this is very unlikely to exist there because players aren't going to buy up so many, a large percentage of the all rings that exist in the league in order to make some vanity project like this. And if you want +1 to each maximum charge rings and you play in standard, Recombinators will get you that a lot cheaper, as will mirroring one that already exists. Less impractically though, people do sometimes go for 2 stone rings that have +1 to 2 different maximum charges and then a synergistic third mod. For example, you could vendor All's Strength Ring, All's Intelligence Ring, hoping to get +1 maximum power and maximum endurance charges, and then a Valley Ring from Kurgal or a Valley Ring from Ahuatotli. If you get very lucky, this Valley Ring could then contribute global critical strike per endurance charge, global damage per endurance charge, or global damage per power charge. This is not likely to happen. It's going to be in the order of 0.04% to hit, but of course you have a better chance of getting 2 mods out of the 3 that you want, which is always the case, same as it is for Watcher's Eyes. And then while we're talking about wild configurations, the accuracy ring, the triple accuracy ring, is extremely, extremely good. So do keep that one in mind. That is an absolute bonanza if you can hit it. The last thing I think I should touch is the other sources of Precursor's emblems. Now this is not to recommend chasing them from any other means. This is to advise against it, because Precursor's emblems that you get from this will be completely random and they can be complete and utter garbage. In fact, most of the time they will be. So, there are Valdo maps. There is a divination card called Remembrance. Both of these will grant Precursor's emblems. Much, much, much rarer than those 2 sources. You can also pull a Precursor's emblem out of a Voidborn Reliquary key. These are too rare to be anything remotely resembling practical sources, especially when we consider that they're often going to use poorly thought out combinations of input rings. For example, it might waste an All Intelligence ring by vending it alongside Kurgal's Strength ring, which is likely to result in a bad item. These 2 don't synergize well. Even if you get individually good mods on them, you'll end up with rubbish overall. So this full flexibility is a trap. There are 2,128 triple intelligence rings possible, 2,128 triple dexterity rings possible. This is almost all of the exceptionally good combinations that you can get on the Precursor's emblem in general. Once you add in every single possible configuration that can exist, you're adding about 10,000 marginal rings and about 54,000 complete and utter garbage rings, bloating out the pool without adding many more jackpots, and as a result, all of these sources are pretty bad. So for that reason, my advice is simply to forget that those options exist. The divination card's called Remembrance, but its results will be very forgettable. Anyways, that's Precursor's emblem, one of the most complex items in the game. But that's all the theory. If you want to see some of the practice, I've done this as part of a duo video with Slippery Jim 8. I'll put a link to his part down below. What Slippery Jim is doing is he's going to be identifying 100 Precursor's emblems. These will mostly be triple int and triple dex ones, with a small number of triple strength and an even smaller number of mixed ones, so that you can get a bit of a sense as to the depth of possibilities that this hyper RNG item can produce. Plus, because it's Slippery Jim, it's always going to be a lot of fun. Jim gets more and more angry all the time whenever he gets unlucky, and maybe it's just that I'm a terrible person, but I find that extremely satisfying to watch. So, link to Jim's video down below. It's going live at the same time as mine is. I'm going to leave it there. May your Precursor emblem vendor recipes have interesting results.